In this tutorial, we will build a portfolio website with a blog in Next.js. This beginner-friendly video is perfect if you're learning React and Next.js concepts or simply want to build a portfolio to showcase your work. We have a header at the top that leads us to different sections of the page. Then we have a hero section, which is like first thing user sees when they look at your website. It contains like a header, subheader, and also call to action. Also, we have this cool animation on mouse hover. Then we have a project section, which includes the list of the projects that you want to showcase. This includes the title as well as like a skills or stack used as tags. And the projects could also be expanded and include more information about the project as well as the screenshot. And this is a carousel, so someone can quickly go through your projects, and if they want to, they can always close it out by clicking on the button or just clicking outside, just like models work. Then we have a preview of the blog, which with links to the latest blog posts, and this is how going into the blog post would look like. We have like the name of the blog followed by the content. Content has different kinds of tags. We have just paragraph, we have like lists as well as the links. And this is where the blog posts are managed from. This is the admin dashboard, and it functions in a similar way as you would have in a case of a CMS, for example, WordPress. But unlike that kind of CMSs, we are using a headless one. So admin is actually integrated and part of our code base. So this admin dashboard is very easily customizable if you wanted to customize it. All right, let's look at how we can create the post. First, we can list all of them. Also, we have different fields like the title, content, and whether or not we want to include it in a blog. As for creating the new, we are presented with this page where we can add a title and a content. Content comes with different kinds of text blocks that you can pick from, whether or not it's a checklist, also like headings for different sections, paragraph, or just lists. And I will paste one of my blogs to show an example. And maybe let's add a header. All right, so I'm going to save it. Posts successfully created. And if we go to our landing page, and we scroll here, we can see that this is our most recent blog. And if we click here, we're going to see the content that I just added. When I was creating this tutorial, I also had in mind that people watching it would want to customize it in their own way and make it distinguishable. So that's why I made the code easily customizable, for example, updating the color palette. And while building it during the tutorial, we also take into consideration mobile responsiveness, and it is suited for different kinds of screen sizes and devices. And by the end of the tutorial, we also deploy our project, so your portfolio and blog is ready to be shared. Let's start by creating a Next.js app. So go ahead and open up a terminal and navigate to the folder that you want the project to be created. So for me, that's documents, programming, projects. And once I'm in here, to run the command that creates the project, you also need to have Node.js installed. The command is npx create next app. Here we can indicate the version. I'm gonna go with the latest. We should pick the last version when I'm making this video, the most recent one that's been released. And if you don't have exactly create next app, the latest, it would ask you to install, so we're going to say yes. Then we give it a name, so I'll just do portfolio blog. And once we click enter, it would also ask a few questions that we need to set as a configuration. So I'll proceed, click Y for the installing next app. My version is 15.1.2. We're not going to use TypeScript for this one. For ESLint, also Tailwind CSS, yes. Let's do the source directory, app router, no customization, and that's it. Now it would install all the dependencies that's required to run the application. All right, we get this message that it is ready. So now we see inside the application, where we are going to first open this app in an IDE so we can start editing code. And the IDE of my choice is VS Code, although you can use any IDE to follow the tutorial. So that's our project inside our IDE. A quick overview of the file structure. We have a source folder where our logic and most of the code that we're going to update and write is going to go in here. Page.js is a sample code that's showing up as the main homepage right now. We also have global CSS file, which is like a main CSS file. If you notice here at the top, it has the Tailwind imports. That's because we are using Tailwind for styling, Tailwind classes. Here's a configuration file for Tailwind. Inside package.json, we have all the scripts. For example, for running the app, we're going to use dev script. And also we have all the list of dependencies. So I think that's, and then in the public folder, we store all the assets that are publicly available. Now I'm going to use the terminal inside my VS Code, open it up, and run the application for here, npm run, and then selecting the script, which is dev. This is gonna start up our app on localhost 3000, so we can navigate to it and open it up in the browser. And to modify the code that we see in here, we can go to the page.js. This is where all the images, text, and also the buttons are in here. And we don't need any of those, so I'm actually going to go ahead and delete this. Alright, and I'll create a new div here. We can add a header that says something software engineer. Once we save this, this would all automatically get updated. So if we go to our browser now, we're gonna see the text. Let's add also a paragraph below, so which would be like a description, and for the software engineer, and I'm going to add UI UX designer as a text, and let's split this text on 2 lines, so software engineer and maybe UI UX designer on a separate line. So just by adding the span, this will not get updated, as you can see, but what we can do is add a styling to the span. We're using Tailwind for the styling, and how is it different from a component library is that it actually doesn't provide components, it does provide classes that come with the styling. So if we were to update the class, you would apply the styling. For example, in a traditional CSS, you would name the classes, right? And then you'd go ahead and inside the style, define the CSS. But for the Tailwind, if you're using Tailwind, you can apply these classes, and then each of these classes have their own styling. So for example, this would set a padding, this would set a text size, and so on. You can always browse the classes inside their documentation if there's any specific styling that you'd like to apply that I don't go over. But it's fairly, I would say, simple to use this, and you don't have to write a lot of CSS, but it does make the HTML part of the code chunkier. So just something to keep in mind. Okay, so I'm gonna close this out, go back to the code, and inside the span, I'm gonna add a class name. So I'll use block, which is for a display block. I also do have in my extensions part installed the Tailwind extension, which is this one, Tailwind CSS. And what this helps me with is that if I don't remember what the exact CSS of a class is, I just hover over it and it'll show me. This means that the span would get applied, the display of it would be block. Okay, and we can save this. It would show up on a separate line. And let's update the styling for the header. So this one we are going to do text for Excel, font bold, we don't need the center, and tracking, let's do light. So this should update the size of the text. When it comes to the text colors, we can update the text and also setting like other, for example, background colors in general. We can change it by, there's like a Tailwind provides a color palette, so every color comes with like a different shade. In this case, I'm gonna go with purple 400. And if I want to do darker, I just increase the number. All right, now let's add the styling for the paragraph here. So I'm going to do margin at the top, set it to 6. Text of this, we can do XL, maybe lighter than the current text. So by default, this was black, and we're gonna do text gray 700 and then set the line height. I will go with 8. All right, now we can have a set of buttons below this text, and for them I'll create a separate div. So I'm gonna do 2 buttons. The first one will say something like about me, and then the second one and another one which would be contact me. So those do look like a text if we take a look at it. Only thing that differentiates is that on hover over it does have cursor set as a pointer. But let's update the styling so they do look like they are buttons. And I will start by adding some paddings we can do on the sides. So when it's padding X, that means on the X-axis it's gonna add that number of paddings, and then on the Y something smaller, for example 3. Also rounded border, so for that rounded, and I'll select, these are the options, LG, which would set the border radius. I will do also purple 700. Because this is purple, the text to show up, it's better if we set it to white. I'll do font medium, and on hover I'm going to make this lighter. So 400, oh I need to, let's do 600 and 500. And for the other one, I will copy some of the styling, but also update some of it because we don't want this one to look exactly the same. For example, I'm gonna remove this hover background color and also this purple, and instead I'll add a border, define the border color. Let's do gray 600. So if we want to set the color, we first have to set the border for it to show up, and this is how it would look like. Because we have text white, the text doesn't show up, so let's remove that. And let's set the different color on hover. We're gonna match border to the other button. All right. Now in terms of like the layout and how these buttons are positioned, we can change the main, like their parent container. we would still make this flex, so display type would be flex. We set margin at the top so we have some space in between the text and the buttons, and also the gap in between items we can set it to be 4. So if we were to, for example, add more items here or buttons, it would also respect this gap and show up like that. And we can update this names classes for the parent container. Since we don't actually need the grid display, so instead what I'm going to do is have it display as a container. We also don't need minimum height screen. I'm gonna leave the paddings and remove the gap. Let's also leave the font style, and we do container. We also want this container to be centered, so for that we're going to add the margin on the left and the right side set to auto. So if we save this, what container does is that, as you can see here, these are media breakpoints. So on different breakpoints or different the screen sizes, it sets the maximum width. Now let's update a color scheme. Since we're going to be using like a darker mode, I would say let's update the background, also colors for the text. And what I'm going to do is I'll make changes in the layout.js this time so that it applies to the whole application. So page.js does live inside layout.js. As you can see, we have the HTML here, also the body tag, and any other page that we create inside the app folder, this logic that would apply here would also automatically be applied to the other pages, so we don't have to keep redefining this class name. So for the background, I'm going to set gray 900. And let's do text white 100 by default. Text slate 50, and I'm gonna update the color of this paragraph to be gray 300 instead of 700, so it works better with the background of our current version. Also, if we want to set, as you notice, we have some kind of different pattern going on here where we use this indigo color as, I would say, the main color. And this is this, actually it's purple, but we can set this so every time we don't have to define this shade of purple, we can set this as a primary color. And to do that, we can go to the Tailwind configuration, and let's say if you want to use something else as your primary color, you don't want to necessarily use purple, this would be easier because you can just set it right now, and then every time I would use primary class, it would apply to your class. So I think that's great that we have the option, and in here I'm going to do primary, and we have to import the colors. So let's do, before I call them, constant colors that equals to, it's coming from Tailwind CSS package, and call this colors.purple. So let's do primary here. All right, so if I change this to pink, then this would automatically get updated. All right, I will revert this back to purple. And before we move to the project section, we can add like a glow here to spice up this component a little bit. And to be able to see glow here, we don't need to necessarily like add an image. We can just create that with a CSS, pretty much creating a circle shape by setting the border radius, and then adding some effects like colors and blurs. And we can position it relative to this container right here for our hero section. So to do that, first I will update the styling of your section and add a class for position relative. And I'll add another class here for that effect that I mentioned. Let's do class name. First things first, position absolute. Then we define in relation to this where we want this positioned. So I'll define a length from the top and also right. So I want somewhere at the top right corner and not exactly at the 0, but let's do, for example, 12, which would be 48 pixels. And I will do same thing for the right side, which would be 12 pixels. So this should be placed here, but we don't see it because it doesn't have a color or a size. So next thing, let's define the sizing. I'm going to do 600 pixels, height also 600 pixels. And let's do this for larger screen. So I'm gonna add a breakpoint for small. And then by default, let's have maybe 300 pixels. All right, I'm gonna use the primary color right now, 700. And if we do dash and then some number, for example, 50, we're gonna get an opacity. And finally rounded full, which would give us a border radius of like a high number. So it's basically would create a circle. So that's our circle, but it doesn't look like a glow. So let's add a glow effect by adding blur, and we can define how strong the blur want to be by using this sizes. I'm gonna do 3XL. That looks great. Let's have 2 more of these, but with different sizes and shading, so it looks more like our glow has a depth. And this, for visual purposes, I'm going to make the opacity less after we're done with the other 2. So let's take a look at this. We have top position. I'm going to update this and set it to something higher, for example, 16. And this one as well. As for the size of the second, I'm going to make it smaller. Let's do 400 and 400 for this one. As for this, I'll do 150. And little lighter, so, but we can increase, so primary 500, but we can increase the opacity. Let's set that to 60. As for the blur, I'm gonna make it smaller, set it to 2. And the third one, this is going to be 20. 200, actually let's do 300. For the default, and let's change this to 470 and the blur size to XL. Alright, so we can see that this is the smallest one, then we have another layer and another layer. Now we can completely change the opacity of all of this. So if I were to wrap this in a new class and set the opacity to 10, and this has to be class name, is how it is looking like. Let's move even further up. So the gaps that I have here are kind of the increment at the same level. So what I'm gonna do is once I change this, I have to change for all of them. So if I do this one 4, this one 4, and let's do 8 and an 8 for this. All right, that looks good. Moving on to the projects, we are going to create we're going to use the HTML tag section to put all our logic of the project in it, and we're going to create a new component. So we've been working on this page, but as our code becomes larger, it's better to separate it into components. So makes it reusable if in larger projects you want to use it somewhere else. So what I usually do is in the app folder, I create a new folder, components. And in here, I'll create a new file, name it project section.js. So just like we have for the homepage, this would be a functional component. So if we do constant project section, and we're not going to take in any arguments for now, and we're going to return a new section. So ID of this would be project. Instead of projects, we are going to say featured projects, since it would not list all of them. And we can do export default project section. So for this to show up on our application, we need to import it. So I'm going to remove this and replace it with import project section. And it's from components folder project section. Okay, once we have the import, I'm going to minimize the div class that we have for our hero section and add the project section in here. If I save this, can't resolve. Okay, so it's from the same folder, components. Okay, so we do see the featured projects here. All right, let's work on the logic. And first, tackling the section part, I'm going to add some paddings on it. So let's do by default 4, and then the padding on the sides 32. Then on larger screens, we're going to increase the padding progressively as we go. All right, and for the header, text, let's make it 3XL. Font is going to be bold, and the color would be white. Margin at the bottom 12, and let's center this text so it would be text center. I'm going to save this. Let's take a quick look at the changes. All right, that looks... I don't see the padding applied here. Let's examine, open up our console and see what is going on. I put everything in the ID. This should have been a class name. Okay, so now we do see that styles coming in. And what I would do is inside here, I'm going to create a list of the data that I want to display, and then I'll create project cards that would actually display the data. What the project cards will have is a header, name of the project, and also as a text, I would use the technologies that I used in the project. So let's create a new variable for that, constant project, and I will, each project, we're gonna have a title. All right, let's do real estate website, and then we'll have tags, which is also going to be an array. Let me close this one out. So I'll create about the 6 of this, but the number doesn't matter because we're gonna map each of them, so each of them should be displayed later on once we write the logic for this. All right, what I did was just fill in the data for the other projects, and these are actually all of them here. I have them on my channel. For example, this AI summarization tool. I also started using, so there's few that are AI related, and I started using Cloudflare, which I'm really happy about, and also I have a tutorial going over one of their technology queues, which is really helpful for creating scalable applications, especially if you want to batch process something with the AI. So make sure to check out those tutorials. Same for the feedback platform, which is a SaaS. I didn't include here like Stripe. I'm also using that for payments. And yeah, a lot of this are full stack applications. Don't forget to also subscribe so you don't miss any projects that I release in the future. Let's now take this data and display it below where we have the featured projects. So I'll create a new container for that. And inside we're gonna do project map, project, and then index. So when we're mapping things, it's important to have a unique key. So let's indicate key and set that as an index. And if we display project title here, we should see all the projects. Take a quick glance. All right, now we have all the 6 projects displayed on the same row. Let's divide that and let's have 3 projects per row. So for that, I'll make this parent container grid. And actually by default, I'll do 1 because on smaller screens, we only have really space to show 1 project. And I'll set the gap to 4. So breakpoint for larger screens, then grid columns, and then we do 3. Let's save that. Let's see how that looks. All right, here we are. Starting to modify a main container for the project. So I'm gonna do class name. Background, let's set to 800, but opacity about like 30%. I will also add this backdrop blur, and the size of it would be small. So basically what it does is there's a lot of CSS going on here and using a lot of variables, which is why I'm glad I'm using Tailwind not to write this out by hand, but it uses this blur, sets it to 4 pixel, and also applies backdrop filter, which is like a CSS attribute. So we have that backdrop blur small, rounded corners, let's do large. Add a padding set to 6. I'm also going to add a border, and let's set the border color to something similar that we have here, border gray but a little bit lighter. So I'm going to do 700 and also about 50 opacity. We add also a hover effect. So here I'm going to use primary 15 and then 50. Also, let's do transition colors effect. That's how it looks like. So as we hover over this border, changes color. We can also add a little bit of shadow on the hover. I think that would be a good animation, and a small should make sense. Cool. So next thing, we also want to display the text here, right? And then in terms of the positioning, the text would go below the title. So let's have a flex container, and then inside the flex, we're gonna show each tag side by side. So I will create a new div here, which I'm gonna put inside this. This should close it out. And I'll also wrap this project title inside a header. All right, class name would be flex direction, column, and height. Let's set to full. So all of them kind of have a similar height. As for the headers, we're gonna do class name, the title, text large, font would be semi-bold, text white, and margin at the bottom 2. All right, a new container that would include the tags. Now, because tags is an array, right? So it's a nested array inside of an array, we have to separately map out each of these tags. And then they're gonna have their own containers and their own styling. So let's do that, but the tags that we're mapping is per project. So project.tags.map, we can use the span. I'm gonna review the styling this actually gave us. So let's do padding 2, and then on the side 0.5. Text I will do extra small, rounded full for that, like a pill, more like a effect. Background, let's do primary 500, and then opacity I'll only set to 20%. As for the text color, let's do primary 200. Border color, this would be cool to have like a same color as we have on the background, but just with a little bit higher opacity. So let's do 30, and let's see how that is looking like. All right, this is what we have, but what I'm noticing here is that it doesn't, it overflows because we have a span. So to fix that, let's update this div styling, and we'll make it flex wrap, and gap would be 1, so we have some distance in between this pill tags, and margin at the top set to auto. All right, so now if it doesn't have, let's say, space on that row, it would apply and show up on the next row. There's few things we can do from here to showcase the projects. If you want to add like a links where when user clicks, it directly redirects to your project if you have it hosted, then that could be easily done if we were to turn this into a link component. So like this, and then add an href, which would include, you can add absolute links in here, and from the NextJS, you'd have to import link from next link. But what I'm gonna do instead, I'm gonna display this as a information inside the model, where I'm gonna have a screenshot of the project, and on the left it would be a description. It would include other information like tag stack and things like that. So for displaying the model, let's create a separate component, which later on we're gonna pass project information into. So I'm going to head to the components folder, create a new file, name this project model. At the top first, I'll import the image using which we're gonna display our like a screenshot or a mockup image that you have. Then let's create a project model that's gonna be a component. And in terms of the arguments that we're gonna be taking, so we want the project to get the project information to display. We want the closing out the model. I'm also going to do like kind of like a carousel, so when one project is like a sample preview is open, you can browse through the other projects. So we'll need on next so that we can set the next project, and on preview. And let's return a div container. So at the top of the div, we are going to have a title. So put that in the h2, and then a button that would close out the model. All right, we have on click that would be closed, and inside the h2 we are going to take project object and display its title. I'll add the styling for the main container. So we want this to be a model, which means that regardless of where on the page we click, it would always open in a fixed position. So I'll set the position fixed. Inset, let's do 0. Background, I'm going to do maybe gray 800, and let's set the background opacity to 75%. And the display type, that would be flex item center, justify center, and we set this index high so that it is always visible and it's always layered at the top of other components on our page. And now if we were to go to our project section, first we can import our component. And then we can create a state that would open, based on that would open up a project inside project model. So to create the state, we need to import useState from React. But if we import that, since this is a hook for the client and our component is not a client component yet, we will get an error. So as I save this, you can see that we are importing, and it says that we need to use client this directive so that we set our component as a use client, and it has to always be on the top of the page. So that is what I'm going to do. I'm going to add a use client here. So now we can import this without an issue, and we can create a new state. So we have titles here, maybe if we, in terms of our projects, but if we track the unique projects, it would be good if we also added IDs, so that way we don't have to store the whole project. We can just store a project ID in our state that would track which project was most recently clicked on and which project we want to expand. All right, and that's for the project. So constant name of our state would be selected project, and set select project. By default, this would be null. So then we create a function which, once the user clicks this function, it would update the state and make that project so we just directly do ID. And here, as you know, we pass the close model function on the project model. So let's also define that function, constant handle close model. What this is going to do is it would simply set the set selected project to null. So none of the projects are selected. Next on, we have handle next project. This is a good type of the things to think about. Let's say if you're interviewing and they ask you to iterate over this array, if you just use ID, you have to make sure that they might give you a sample data, but you should still ask about the edge cases and see is there a chance that this ID is not always incrementing in number, and it could be something randomly generated string, for example. Okay, so for this this one, we first find the position inside the array, right? So that would be current index. So constant current index that equals to projects, and we use the JavaScript findIndex function where we iterate over the project, and if we have a project.id that equals to selected project, then that's our current index. And I'm gonna remove this. If current index for some reason equals to -1, that means the project was not found. We're gonna return null. And then if that's not the case, we calculate next index. And what we'll do here, since we have kind of like a carousel situation, we'll take in the current index and add a +1. But let's say if user is at the blog website, so index of this would be 5, and we want to move into the 6. We don't have a 6. We don't have a project that's positioned at 6. This is the 6th project, but the find index starts at 0, right? So we don't have a 7th project that the index 6 would be looking for. So that means that we want to reset this back to the first item. So to do that, we use the modulus, and we take the project's length. And then finally, we set the select project. We take the ID. So once we have the next index, if we do projects and then brackets next index, this is going to return, for example, this item. And then we take its ID and set that as our current state. All right, now we have to do kind of similar, but instead of incrementing, we do decrement. So I'm gonna rename this, set it to previous. Current index, we need current index. Let's say if we still check if it is equal to -1, we return null. And for previous index, we do -1. But now instead of, so if we go from 0 to -1, we want it to reset to the last element, which is also the length of the project. So we're gonna do -1 plus projects.length. And then we do the module, we add the module for the projects that length. Set selected project, and let's use this variable instead. And I'm going to save this. I will pass this to a model, which I still haven't added yet. So it doesn't really matter where in here we add the model, because it will always have the same positioning in terms of styling. So I'm going to go here, and the first thing is that a model, if nothing is selected, is not going to show up in the first place. So we'll do set selected project. If this is not null, then it's going to proceed and fire this code, which is project model. Then for the project information, we find the project that has a selected project ID. So this should be project ID. Okay, so it does equal to selected project. We pass the onClose handle close model, which we just created. All right, then we have on next, handle next project, and on previous, handle previous project. As you notice, this handle project click is grayed out. That is because we're gonna add that on this buttons itself. So let's go inside the projects.map, and this div, I'm gonna turn it into a button, and I'll do on click equals to handle project click. And we're going to pass as an argument project.id. Let's save that. And I think some of the styling got updated by default. I guess the button has set some CSS. So let's do text left as we had previously. All right, that is our model, which we're gonna update the styling, but we see the newsletter app title show up, which is what we have here. Let's start updating the styling of this. Grayed out layer would be just a layer behind, and then for the model itself, we would position it something on a smaller level. So if I'm gonna start updating the classes of the div that we have inside. So for this one, let's do background gray, something more with a higher opacity, so let's do 90. And then we can set the rounded to LG, max width for Excel, and then by default the ratio 11 out of 12. Max height, let's set that to 90 of the viewport, and overflow for the Y, that would be auto. And save this. So position like this, let's update, set some padding of the size of 8, and then we can either set like a fixed width, or we can let it update the width based on the content. So it's more up to the preference. If I do height, we can set height to full like this. And I think I'm gonna remove this 90% opacity and make it 100%. All right, now I will wrap this into a separate div where we have a button and a project title. Let's update the style for project title. This would be last name text to Excel. Font, we set that to bold. And as for the text, let's do primary 50. And in terms of like the position, so for the button, we're gonna use something that has the shape of the X, but we want it to position. I'm gonna update, I'm actually not gonna use just the character, but we're gonna use a package that contains different icons, but we're gonna move this to be on the right corner as the same level as the project title. So for that, we need to update the styling of the parent container. We can also make this flex and then set the positioning to be justified between. That's gonna move the icon to the right. All right, let's install this package library. It's very easy to browse icons. We just type it from here, and it contains a lot of different ones. So for example, if I do close, we can use this one, and when it comes to installing the package, we can run the command npm install lucid. Okay, I was very confident that I remembered the name, but it is Lucid React. And we can examine the name of this component, or if we do scene action, it should give us like this code snippet. And the styling of this components can be changed. We can apply Tailwind classes just like we've been applying to our components. So that's why I like to use this module. And inside of this, I will call this one. Yep, and then on hover, let's do a little bit of background. Oh. All right, that just changes the color, but I want to do first rounded full. Padding, let's do 2, and on hover the background becomes 870, so opacity increases, so it should become darker. All right, that's good. Now before we display the image, what I was also thinking of displaying in terms of project is like a description, just like you would write it in your resume. There's like a short description of what the application does, then like the long description that includes explanation of the features and also a tech stack. I also browsed and got inspiration from some of the projects that were listed on acquire.com, and that's how they have like the setup. So for that, we do need to add that information first before we display it inside the project section, and then update the project model component to handle those changes. So I went over the array for the projects, and in every item I added these fields, which are for the description. Then we have full description, image path, and the text stack. Technically, we could use what we have in the tags as a text stack, but what I wanted to do is expand a little bit more in the details, what tools even I'm using. So that might be helpful. As for the image, I added images inside public folder. That's where we can store the assets. And these are different images of the projects. All of them are in PNG, although you can use other formats here. For example, we have SVG. And once we update the fields, it should just match the title. And if you have a folder inside the public, let's say images, then it should be something like images and then the file name. So just matching the path, starting from, you don't have to include public, but everything that comes after that in our image field. Okay, so those are all the updates. I am going to save this. We can go back to project model, since here we already passed the project, so we don't have to define this new fields necessarily inside the props. And after this, let's create, so we have a flex here, let's create another row, and then in this row we're gonna have two columns, the text on the left and then image on the right. So I'm gonna close this out and this one as well. Can also make this flex column by default, and then on larger screens let's do flex row and set the gap to be 6. So inside here we're gonna have two divs, one for the text, one for the images, and we can start adding images already here. So this would be image that has, we always have to indicate a source, that project image. Alt text would be project title, and then we don't have to anymore set the width and the height. We can do layout that equals to fill. Object fit, this is gonna be cover. And now this is relative to the whole page, so let's update that. Let's make it relative. Set height to, I'm gonna do 64. Width full, and then on larger screens width would be half, because on smaller screens we have it as flex direction is column, and then all larger screens we have it as a row. So that's how it looks like. And let's also indicate and adding the text here. Let's start with the paragraph for the description. Another one for the full description. Let's set the width for this on a larger screen to be the half, and space. Why we're gonna do 4. Cool, I'm gonna change the class, add the class name to change the color of the text. I'll set it to gray 300, and same for the full description. Okay, now we have another div for the tech stack. So let's first write that in, and then we're gonna create like a list items and then unordered list to map them out. For the tech stack, class name would be font semi-bold, margin at the bottom too, and text, I think we can keep that also at, maybe let's try primary. And in unordered list where we take the project tech stack and then map them out, let's see how that looks like. So we have the list here. Let's add the bullet points. So by default those are removed, but we can add them inside the unordered list. And class name, if we do select list disk and then list inside, that should give us that effect. Okay, that looks good. So I wonder if we should make the height smaller. Yeah, I think that looks better. All right, let's add the icons to the left and to the right so that we have a space for that. I'm gonna increase, that's too much. Let's do 8, but we also want some kind of padding between, because this is too close to this one. So let's do margin at the bottom, maybe 3. Okay, and then let's browse the icons for the right and the left buttons. I think this one would be good. And then I think there should be one that's exactly like that, that says left. We can position these buttons relative to our container, except for the gap for, we're gonna have justify between and then width full. Okay, I see one of them. Where's the other one? So width, let's have the same as our model container, and then this one has max width to 4XL. Also gonna remove gap 4. And let's push this a little bit to the left. And it's from the top, it should be in the middle, and same as on the horizontally. So now we want to take the height and the width, not height, just the width, and also including the padding because we have padding here, and move by that measurement to the left. So for that we can use the class name translate x full, which will take like 100% of the x, like size on the x-axis of the element, and then move that to the left. And if we save this, we're gonna see how that is working, and same if we add here. And then if we want to adjust the value, so if we hover over this, we're gonna see that translate x value is 100%, and we can adjust this by using brackets. So this would be 100%. If we do 120, it would move a little bit further towards the left. And then this should adjust based on different sizes. And it works for both views. And if we actually do this, then our data gets updated, and we go around circles doing this. Let's test out closing out. Great. Also, if we click outside, that we can implement right now. So first I'm going to import userref from React. Then I'll create a new ref called model ref. Okay, and the function handle outside click. This would taking event, and we say if model ref current that equals to event target, then we call the onClose. And then we can pass this to onClick, handle outside click, and inside here we add this reference to the model container. And what we also do is once we click these buttons, we don't want the close function to be triggered, right? So we're going to stop the propagation. What we're going to do is stop like bubbling up and finding the event it has to fire. And we can do this by calling onClick, taking the event and stop the propagation. All right, that's why it's not firing. So if I click outside, it should close it out, okay? And if I click like this should work as it was before. And in the next part of the video, we will work on creating a blog. For the blog, we will integrate a CMS that would come with a built-in editor that would let us write the blog post, for example, format it in a way that the styles would later on, when we display the blog on the user side, it would be displayed as we save them, and we would have like a kind of admin panel where we would be able to log in as admin, create new blogs or modify existing ones. And also we would have a section on the landing page that would link some of the blogs. So for the CMS, we are going to use Payload. It's an open source CMS, and it comes with a lot of different functionalities. I also have other videos about Payload if you want to learn more like advanced features of it, but here we would use it lightly just for the blog, but it comes with different kinds of APIs. What I really like that also there's hooks where you can define how to, when the data is saved or on different actions, you can define different functions that you want to fire. And then it is compatible with different kinds of databases, for example, MongoDB and Postgres. In this case, we're going to use a Postgres, and this is their website. For the installation, there's an option that if you're creating a new project, you can directly create a Payload app that already should have NextJS integrated. But since we already have an existing app, we're going to follow this part where it explains how to integrate it into an existing app. There's PMPM and NPM. We are using NPM, so let's first try NPM install. It does say that we might need to use legacy dependencies. All right, and this is the list of dependencies. So for the database installer, we're going to pick the Postgres. All right, they seem to have, there are some dependency issues. So let's try the legacy peer dependencies flag. All right, that looks good. And this one, All right, same thing. We have some conflicting errors, so I'm going to use that flag one more time. And let's see what the second step is here. So this should install directly in app folder, and we need to add some files into that folder for Payload to run. We are gonna go to this link on GitHub for the blank template. Take this Payload folder and move the folders over and the files over as well. I don't know if there's an easy way. So for GitHub, I usually either check out the code or create a pull request, but because here we have a lot of different codes, what we can do is download these files and then reference them where it was copied from. And also I'm going to put it on my GitHub so you can also check out from there. Copied the files over, and since we are using the JavaScript, I updated them. In this example, there's TypeScript used, as you can see on the file extension. So I updated them to be instead JavaScript, and hopefully I didn't miss anything. There were quite a few files. And as it shows here that we would have to add if we had any logic, which was mainly for the main page, since besides that we didn't have anything else, any other pages. So I'll create a new folder. I will name this, we can do, I guess 2 apps would be confusing. Landing page. It does say it would include the root layout, so let's move this over here. So it would be layout.js and then also page.js. Let's update the imports. Yeah, because we're importing some things from the components folder. I'm gonna close out these files that I just added. All right, now next we have to add the payload plugin to our Next.js configuration. That makes sure that we have the correct compiling settings set up. And let's copy this here. We have a configuration file. I believe it would be this one. So it also exports this next config object, just like we're gonna do it here, but we're gonna wrap it with payload function. So I'm gonna copy all this, paste it. If there's anything TypeScript related, which I don't think there is, we would have to change it, but let's save that. So we also need to make sure that our project is set to use ESM, and this can be done by 2 ways. We can add type module in our package.json, or it says here give your Next.js config the mjs file extension. And as you can see, we already had this mjs file extension, so I don't think we would have to add the type module in the package.json. Okay, and then next thing is our payload configuration. So usually when I create an app with the payload setup, it does create the payload config file. I don't see any here, so I'm going to add that in. Since we have an app folder, let's add it inside the app folder, new file. All right, let's paste this in here. And the only thing we would have to update is here, as you can see, it's using Mongoose adapter from DB MongoDB, but instead we are using Postgres. So we would have to switch out from that. Let's see, the name of this package would be, we can look into package.json and see this one. I'll double check with the payload documentation for updating this, but that seems to be the package name. And let's see, it's probably a Postgres adapter. With the lowercase first letter, and then we're gonna replace the DB call here. What this is doing, it's setting like certain configurations. For example, editor is using lexical editor. Then for the secrets, it's loading this payload secret from environment variables, which we would have to set those up. And also same for the database URL, which is like a connection URL to the database. Let's save this, close this out, and then we have, so here it says tsconfig to be updated to include a path that it points to, so payload config needs to know where to look for configurations. We have a JSON config file, and if we just add this as another path, I think that should be sufficient. All right, we are already running the app, but I'm gonna restart just in case, and let's navigate to this. So the admin console or dashboard should be on this -admin on our local host. And let's see what's the error we're getting. Global CSS. I wonder if we should move this as well inside the landing page. Let's try that. Oh, it didn't update all the imports, so I'm gonna move components folder also in the landing page. Is looking for payload config, which we just defined in JSON config. It's indicating that it's not finding it because since I copied, it was the TypeScript file, and I had to update with the JavaScript file, which is what we have. Since the path is, let's update this. It's either we update this to be source, app, or we just move the payload config. So I'm gonna, I think, move it. Would be better to have it just configurations in the root folder. So let's save it. And instead of the URL, we have to update because the Postgres adapter is going to use the connection string field of pool object. As for the database URI, what I do for database hosting actually, and then this works really well with the payload, is use Vercel's Postgres. I think behind the scenes they're using Neon, and also in my previous video I did use the Neon database. You can check also that one out. And to create, you need a Vercel account, and then in the dashboard to create a new, like a storage, I'm gonna go to add new and store. Here I will press create database and I will select Postgres. Click continue, accept. Let's give it the database name. I'm gonna do portfolio blog. And then once this is created, it would provide us with the URL. So there's different options. So let's copy this snippet and back to our code. In the root of our project, we're gonna create .env file. So as you can see, this is grayed out because it is included in git ignore, and we don't push these changes once we make a commit to the git, so it's not publicly available. And the name, so we have to name it database URI. So I'm just gonna copy it to make sure. And here I'll paste the value. I'm just gonna remove the PSQL, so it would just be this URL string. To say show secret, so it would replace the stars with the actual value that you need and paste it that way. So the next thing we need is payload secret, that is going to be defined like this. As for the secret, this is something we can generate. So I'm gonna go here and I'll use a command. So it's gonna be a random string, right? So I'll use the command open SSL, rand, and then base 64, indicate 32. The value that I get here is what I'm actually going to paste it in. Server, or we don't even need to reload it. Usually when it detects the changes in env, it does reload. And if we navigate to the admin route, we're gonna get redirected to create a first user page where we can set an email and a password. And in this video, we're not gonna provide email adapter. So make sure to remember your password, since we won't be able to reset it unless we do it directly from the database. So I'm going to enter the email and create new password. Let's do create, and it will redirect us to the collection page. So this is our admin dashboard. We're gonna see all the collections here. So far by default, it only creates users. And from here, you can add users. Let's say if someone else is editing your blog, for example. Or what we'll do next is also create the collection for the blog, so we can store that as well and have that data structure in. Payload configuration, this is a field where we indicate our collections. And this is an example of how we define a collection by giving it a name, defining its fields, with also giving each field a name and a type. So let's use this as a starting example. And what I think would be the best, and I usually do, is create a separate folder for collections and store the files there. Then we can import them into the config and add them in the array. So let's go to the app folder. I'm gonna do a new folder, collections, and inside here I'll do a new file called posts and JS. So let's paste that. I'm going to remove the type. From here as well. So we do actually want, for the blog posts, let's name those posts, and this is the Slack, the fields. We are going to have a title, which I'm also going to make it required by setting that to true. And I will add a field for the content, which is going to be a type rich text. So this will give us that rich text editor that comes from the lexical. And further required, I think we can have this optional. Okay, now we can save this and go back to payload config, import the collection. So from collections posts, and we added this inside source folder and the app. So let's define those as well. And we simply need to add them in an array here. And to add a blog post, I'm going to go to the posts. We can click on the add button here and fill in the title and the content. As I mentioned, content has a rich text editor, so we can add a lot of different kinds of blocks in here, like for example, unordered list. We also have different headings and so on. And this, if you wanted to add different types, that is also customizable. I have some blogs on the Medium. I write them occasionally, so that is what I'm going to copy here. And let's say add a bullet point, so different AI models. Then we have Anthropic's Claude. Alright, I will save this, and I have another one. Post, create new, paste the title. That's the article. It has also some links that I have linked here, and I'm gonna save that. And to take a quick peek at the API, so we have, as we added the API folder, we can access this data using an API. So that's functionality. Payload handles it, creating it and managing it. And if we were to call this API, would be posts to, and then some of this query parameters here. This is how the response would look like. So there's like a JSON response. It has different fields. The content comes as like this big object that starts with the root, and then we have like a bunch of nested childs for every different either like paragraph or different kinds of like blocks. And yeah, that's how it works in a nutshell. All right, now we have these two posts, and let's query them and add a section below feature projects that would display like a preview of this blog post. To query documents in the payload and the data, there's different ways of doing it. There's a local API, which we just saw the REST API, which we just saw the preview of. Then there's local API and a GraphQL. What we're gonna use here mostly would be the local API, and let's here's like an example of how it would work. So we would get the payload and then run different kinds of functions on it. One of them is find. In the find, we can define the collection that we're looking for and also filter the fields. We can also, there's a sort option based on the fields, and they also in the third version have a join. But we can use this find first, and we need to create like a utility function, so every time we don't have to define the payload. So for that, what I will do is inside source folder, I am going to create a new folder, call it lib, and in here I will create a new file for payload.js. So this is basically the setup for the local API. We need to import the configuration and call this getPayload function. I will save this, so later on where we want to use this, we can just import it into our component. So let's, I'm gonna close all this out, going back to our landing page below the project section. So let's add a creating a new component. I'm gonna call this post section. I will import here the get payload function. All right, creating the posts section. So this would be an async component since we have to make a request. And then what we would do is first we call the payload So payload that equals to await get payload function. And then similar to how it's defined here, let's access the post. Constant posts, it would equal to await payload.find. And we have to pass the collection name. Post, and I will also do limit 2. Let's display 2 posts. I don't think we need, we need any filters or anything for now. Let's close this out, and we can console log those posts, make sure they're coming in, and add the header here, latest from, I'll let the break, the blog. All right, I will do export default, post section, let's save that. Going back to the page, I'm gonna do an import here. Add that in here. And since this is a client component, server component, all right, I saw an update that instead of config, we should use config promise, and then in here, the promise is what gets returned. Let's save that, and instead of payload, the brackets, we just return the payload object. So let's reload the page, and we can see that this section, not getting error no longer, and then this section is showing up as we see that our post items come back. So let's see what we have here. There's like an ID that we can use for mapping as a unique key. Then we have a title as well as the content. So let's just display the title. We can also add this, like the date when this post was published. So if we create a new div here, so this is already saved in the post object. So we can just map them out, and this would be post map. We add a post. We don't need to use the index in this case, and I will also make them as a link, which we would add a href to. So for now, let's add href as default, and we don't have the ID with underscore, it's just ID. Let's use article tag for HTML, and then for the title names, we're gonna do h3. This would be post.title. So posts, it's inside the docs, so we have to access the docs first. Let's do that. And import the link from NextJS at the top. All right, those are my 2 blogs, and let's see the URL. We don't have the slug, we just have the ID, but we haven't implemented the post page yet, so this links wouldn't work. Let's do some styling for this section. Add other data like the time. So I will place this in a separate div. Let's use the time. So it would show this like timestamp. Instead, let's update that to like a human readable time. And for that, I'll write a new function. There's also a lot of I'm sure modules that we can install and then it would handle the time conversion. But since we're using a simple format, which would include the month, the day, and the year, I don't think we would need something separate. So it would be return timestamp and then to local date string is the JavaScript function that we can use to convert that. We just need to indicate what format we're converting and then what fields that we want to extract. So month long, day numeric, and then year also numeric. So if we take this function and call it on our timestamp, we have to also convert it into a date format and then use that on the date, because this timestamp by default it would be just a string, so we don't have this function on a string. Yep, that looks good. So let's do updates on the container itself. So I will set the max width to 7 XL. We're gonna set the margins to be auto and then add some padding, larger padding on the top at the bottom, and paddings on the x-axis will increase as we go on to larger screens. Now what we can do is have this title on the left and maybe the other two more on the right side, so on separate columns, and we can do this, wrap the title, wrap both of these divs in a div container that would be flags, and gap. Let's do something smaller by default, and then on larger screens, larger gap. And we can set the width of this to be something like 72, and then the other two, we're gonna wrap them into a grid. So we're gonna create a grid with 2 columns. And it would take up rest of the available space. So let's do flex 1 so that we take that space and then define what happens inside this container, which would be grid columns 2, and then gap between those columns. Let's do something like 12. And what else we have here for this one? Add a styling on the link. It would be group, and let's do block. Space Y4 on the article. For the the header, we're going to have text to XL, font semi-bold, text light. Let's do if this is hovered, and the reason we're doing group hover here is because not only we want the title to change the color when it's hovered, but not only on the text, but also on the other parts of the text, for example, time. So that indicates that this whole thing, which is a link, is clickable. And we can do transition colors. Right, I think the header, did we add styling? Okay, let's add the styling for this one as well, the section header, and this would be larger than the other. So for example, 4XL, font bold, text also light. Add some margin here. And maybe if we do this a little bit a different color, let's do text. Slate 300. The section is literally latest from the blog. Let's sort if we have more blog posts to make sure that always the latest shows up, and we can use sort for this. This is an example how it works. So if you can define a field that you want to sort your data by, and if it has a minus, then it would sort in a descending order, which is what we want. And I'll add that on a new line. But we won't see any difference since it was already the 2 of the latest, since those are the only ones in the database. All right, now to display the post, so we have the link, but we actually need to create a page. Pages in Next.js, they are just another component, but it's the way they're created that makes them a new page. So if we go to the app folder and create a new folder, let's name this post, taking into consideration the URL that we want this new post to use. And then if we create here like a new file and we name this file page.js, this would be like a new page. I'm going to do create component. We don't have to name it page, but it has to be an export default component. So add a closing tag. Now we can navigate to this new page. And we'll see this right here. What would be unique for every post page is we need to know which post that we want to render, right? So that's why we need to access a variable, but it would be a dynamic variable because we might have like hundreds of different blog posts. We can't all hard code them. And oh, this is an interesting thing. I didn't add the layout.js. Usually it should, oh, because I don't have the, yes, I know what's going on. I'm gonna move this post to the landing page because we also have, this is where we have the layout, and delete this extra layout. So technically our main layout page is this one. So this should be rendered inside that. So if I go to posts right now, and the reason we're not seeing landing page inside our URL is because it's in parentheses, so it's hidden. It's for our own grouping this way. You can group the routes to be able to easily separate the logic, but in terms of URLs that the user is able to see, it would only be posts. All right, so let's create that dynamic variable. So for that, in the new folder, I will name this post ID, and we have to wrap it into a brackets, and I will move this page in here. So now we can do like this, then we'll get here. So how do we access this one, which would serve as an ID of the post? This could be done if we make the component async and we take in the params, then the name of this field would be also post ID. And we have to do await, since this is async, and let's console log. I will save this, and what is the error? Oh yeah, we have to, let's do this, await. All right, we have one here. Now let's import the payload and get that query. So we fetch the individual. This time we're gonna use the where and conditioning because we're not fetching all the posts. We're just fetching post that has that ID. So get payload from, let's go back to library. I'm going to remove this line and access payload. Then we look for the post, and this is just find collection name, which are posts. Then we have to define where, and then which field that we want to match. It would be ID, then operation, which is equals, and to the post ID. So now if post isn't there, we return that we return a component that the post is not found. Otherwise, we access the data. So the post response in the find usually comes as an array. So if there is a post, it would be like the first item, and then we can also console log here just to make sure how that looking like. And there's an error. I guess the get payload import is incorrect. Let's see. Okay. I think that's what we had before. Cool, and yeah, that's our object inside the body, which is ID and title. Great, let's display the title now, and this will be inside H1. Leading, let's do 4. All right, and I'm gonna wrap the page in a container and add some paddings. I will remove this font. I think it would also look better if we do text center. What? And for displaying the content of this blog post, we saw the API response that was different, a lot of different fields, and also we have nested children, and somehow we have to take that JSON and convert it into JSX to have, for example, for the type paragraph, we need to have the paragraph tag on the HTML and so on. So there's a lot of different considerations, and what we can use is actually Payload has this function called rich text. It's actually a component, and it's coming from the rich text lexical package, and we can import this rich text as serialized. So there's some packages that do the serialization, so I think it's based on that, so it runs the serialization function, and this is Payload CMS. Rich text lexical from React. I will copy this and add it below the header. And it has the props data, so we pass data content to it. We save this and let's test it out. Oh, it's serialized. It's reach. All right. Yep. So this is where the text shows up, and we might not see some of the styling that we added. For example, this list item classes, by default in Tailwind, it doesn't have the bullets, but it does actually create, like, it created different paragraphs, and also it created unordered list. And then every item, as we added from the editor, is a list item. Let's say if we wanted to change the default styling of how this show up, we can add a styling on top of that. Or let's say if you wanted to add more components, then we could write a logic in the page where you could insert the more components. Example of this would be in my newsletter project, I have a scenario where I'm myself creating this serialized lexical function, and here there's like different node formats, and we display some of the basic serializing, which is actually should be covered by this function. But if you want to configure and add more node types, then this is how you would do. You'd create a switch statement and then return that specific type. For example, I have tags here. All right, but what I'm gonna do for this one to update the styling, I would just apply CSS, and I'll create a new file for that CSS. Add that customized CSS. There's different ways to go about it. One, we can create a CSS file somewhere inside this folder and then import those styles on the page, so it only affects like page, anything that's inside here. Also, we can add a class name to serialized rich text and then update a Tailwind configuration, so applying the styles that only applies to components that are inside that class name. So if we wanted to do that, we can do, I think serialized rich text does take a class name prop as a prop. So payload rich text. We can double check that. If we go, yeah, same, it applied this class. And then we go to global CSS file, which is in the root of the landing page folder. Here we already have some styling, and we apply layer, and then we define which layer we want to apply the styles on. So there's components, base, and utilities. I am going to do components, and after that we can define the class, for example, payload rich text, and something here that we want to apply. For example, we can select header 1, and then we use the keyword apply text for Excel and then font bold. Just for testing, let's go back to, I don't know if we have header 1 here. I'm going to check. Oh, we do. No, that's not front, that's just the title. Alright, I will target first unordered list, and let's apply this clean list inside. And we're gonna see that this actually got updated, and we have the list items here. We can do the same for unordered list, apply the list inside. That would actually apply the numbers. Then do things like update the links, apply, I'm gonna do primary, and then on hover we can do let's do this one, 500. Add a separate stylings for the headings. So in total, we have about 6 headings, and then we're going to decrement the sizes as we go further in the numbers. So the largest one, the first header, it would be text for Excel. Then we define the line height, then the weight of the font, so font bold, margin at the top, also margin at the bottom, and then the scroll margin. So for header 2, we have semi-bold, text 3XL, for header 3 2XL, font also semi-bold with a little bit smaller margin, both at the top and the bottom. And we have XL followed by large. And for the H6, we're just going to do text base. Let's go back to our landing page, and as you notice here at the top, we don't have a header, so that's what we are going to add next. For that, I'll create a new component inside components folder. I will name this header.js. And once we create the component, we can then import that into our layout. Link from NextJS, and at the top, we're going to import that. Then we are creating a component. Let's name this navbar and use HTML tag for navigation. It would be fixed at the top. Margin would be auto. We're going to add a border and set the border color. As for the position, it would be top, also left, from the left 0, right 0, and then the index we set to 2. We set a background color like a hash, and then opacity 100. Then inside we create a flex container. We set the padding, flex wrap, items in the center, justify between, margin auto. We add the link that will be on the left. First thing we see for the usually where the logo goes, and we style the logo. Text would be white and the size of it would be 2XL. Then on the right side, we're going to have a navigation bar that will be hidden on the smaller menus, and it would contain unordered list of the links. So inside the link items, we create the link, we define href. So we're going to have about, that's going to be a separate link. Projects, that will be that's already a section inside our app. And then we have the last one, which we're also going to do as a blog. It's a section. And what we're missing here is another list item. Okay, so we have all the sections, export default navbar. Let's take this and go inside our layout. I'm gonna import that here. And add that above children. Let's see how it looks like and if it needs to, oh, it's from the header. All right, so now we need to add some padding to our, because this is fixed position at the top. With our hero section, or we can wrap the children into a separate container and add a class name so that it applies for every page. And margin at the top, let's set it to 20. Okay, that looks good. And then this would be the same. Smaller for the larger screen, so the breakpoint starts at medium, and this would be margin 20 for medium screens, but by default it would be way smaller, so let's do 7. Okay, I am also going to change the background color. We can make it, so we have background gray 900 set as our default background on the rest of the page, so maybe we can use that. And let's add a class name on hover. Let's do slate 200, and I'm gonna paste this for the other links as well. Oh, not the background, I meant text. Right now, when we click on the projects or the blog, we want this to get focused on the right components. So project ID, we already set this to project, so that's correct. Let's do 1 for the blog. Post section, we can just add like this. And we get redirected to here. And the width of the header seems the content a little bit bigger than that of the page, so I will update the main class name. Let's make this also container. We already have margin auto. Actually, not this one. So add a larger padding. I'm gonna remove padding from the bottom and all right, let's make this smaller and maybe font normal, text 3 XL. All right, moving on to the About Me part, we're gonna create a new page and we'll create it as a post so that we can easily construct and put the content in there and then display it as a separate page. For admin dashboard, by navigating to /admin, going to post and creating a new post. I will name this About Me. And as for the text, this is just like some dummy text. Oh, I guess it didn't paste as I wanted it to. All right, I'm going to start pasting some content. So for each section, let's do heading 3. Yeah, it would be cool if it was formatted when I was pasting it, but professional experience. And then for the title of this section, I'm gonna do heading for each the company or experience heading 4. This would be times. So I will turn this into bullet points, the next starting here. All right, and that's all the sections. I am going to save this. And post was created successfully. Its ID is 3. So if we go back to our landing page, here we should have a about me. I'm going to first import the link from NextLink, since we're just going to link this, and let's turn this into a link. href would be posts and 3. Going to save it. Click, and that's our about me section, which was pretty simple to add this and didn't take long at all. Is that it would still show up latest from the blog, so about me, and then here, because the type of it is a blog post, there's few ways we can avoid including it into this section. We can add another field which the section, when it's displayed, it would look for, and include only blog posts that, for example, have that field set to true. We can also like say that manually exclude like anything that includes about me in the title. So that would be like a quicker way of doing it. But let's do one that is better in terms of practices. And to modify the blog post's data structure, we're gonna go in the payload, collections, and then posts here. Type, I'll make this boolean, and default value would be false. Or actually, let's do true unless we specifically set that to false. So it showed up here. Now if we go into this one, and seems like it is not showing up in the editor for some reason, but other fields are, other fields and other types are. So I'm gonna change this to checkbox. Maybe that will work better. Okay, and if we go here, include it in the blog. All right, I'm going to uncheck this, save this. So now we need to going back from the latest blog, modify the query that we are making. So here I will add a where condition and include it in blog, add that equals to false. It's supposed to be true. Now it's false. Now let's reload the page, and we have the other blog post showing up. Now we are going to add some patterns as a background for our hero section so that it looks better. And for generating the patterns, I generated from this website, which if you want to use it, you can also, I can link it down in the description, but there's different kinds of patterns which you can download as an image or as also like copy the CSS, and they are customizable. So that's why what I did was select the back color which matches the color that we have on the background. Then I selected font color, something similar to our primary. We can also modify opacity and the spacing of the items. So to add this, did I make any changes here? I'm just gonna remove this, save it. We can add a class in global, so that would be, I'm gonna name it pattern background, and I'm gonna paste the CSS that I copied from the website. And we can also, once we see how this looks like, make modifications. I'm going to copy this class and apply it to our hero section. So let's see what would be the best, I guess, div to apply this to. I think this one. This is only inside this container because it has a large padding, so this is only applied to our div, this one with the relative positioning, and then outer container has a padding, so it doesn't expand to the further than this div. What we can do is place that as a separate class and position it relatively to our div. So I'm gonna do and now we have to set first position absolute. Then we can measure what sizes we want to set, but let's start with some default values like 2. And I'll also set the index to -1 because I want this to show up on the layering that we have further on the background. So that looks better. And then the width, because we set 100%, so it's gonna further expand it on. All right, and I will set this to larger. Right, and then we can add a blur. Right now, we don't want this to be cut off like this, and we don't want it to expand on the other section. So if we add a circular blur, its transition would be more gradual. And we are going to modify this linear. In addition to the linear gradient, we are going to add a radial gradient, which is going to define that we want what kind of gradient we want, which is circle at the center, then measures of transparency, then we set the color. Let's save this. So this should create this radial gradient effect. And how also we can make it better is by adding a box shadow. I set the background color to match this one. Here we have some kind of glow, so it looks like the color is a little bit different, so that we are always matching. I'm gonna remove this background color that was generated when we copied over the CSS from here, and I think we can also remove it from here and make it transparent. So that looks better and we can see the glow in the background. WebKit masks to create that circular fade effect, although we're gonna update the color to be slate 900 RGB and this value. So now we can make this smaller in height, since the position of this is like, the shape of it is not square, it's more longer in terms of the width. So we're gonna change from a circle to ellipse, and then we are going to define like a ratio. So for this one, and let's do the same for just a mask. I think we can expand it a bit, make it sub 50%. Want to add an effect, so when mouse hovers over this kind of like a glow and the area that we see patterns mimics that, and this is like totally optional, you don't have to add this, but if you think it's a cool animation and it would make your blog look better, and then we're gonna implement that. So for those kind of animations, we are going to need to have this as at least this part where we're tracking the mouse moving as a client component, because we need to use like a state hook from React, and also some of like listeners to track that. And inside the page we need some of the server components, so we can turn this whole thing into a client component, but we're going to create a separate component for the hero section, and then in there we're going to implement all that functionality. All right, let's get started. I will head to the components folder, create a new file, name this hero section. As I mentioned, the use state, while we're here, I'm going to import that from React, then create a component hero section. I will return a JSX, which we're going to copy from what we already have here. So I think it starts with the div, so let's copy that. Paste it in here. We also need at the top the import of the link, otherwise our link is not going to work. And if we like export this right now, import that into our page and replace this with a hero section. We should test it, make sure that nothing got... I talked all this about making it a client component, and that's one thing I forgot. Okay, so let's reload this. Yeah, it should look the same. All right, let's create a state for... We're gonna have two states. One that's gonna track the position for the mouse, and then another one which is gonna tell us if it's hovering over or not. If it's not hovering over, we're gonna set it to default as it is now, like the glow and then effects that we have. So set mouse position, and for the XY, like that calculates the position, to think of this as an XY axis. So by default, let's set it in the middle for like do 50 and then 50. And for is hovering, that would be a simple like a Boolean value is, and by default it would be false. All right, now let's write a function handle mouse move. This would take in an event as an argument, and if we already know that if it's not hovering, then we're not gonna return anything. That's where the function stops. Then let's get the, so we need to calculate the X and Y position, and then where the mouse is and how big we want this like a rectangle that follows the mouse to be set. So let's name the rectangle, and then we get that from current target, is the value that we access, and then get bounding client, this function. So yeah, let's get the x-axis. That would be environment if we event if we take client x, and we subtract left value and then divide by the width, multiply by 100, and then y value we get the same way, just instead of the width we use the height, and also we use client y. So then we set the mouse position, we update it with x value and a y value. Okay, so we have this function that we are going to add it to our relative, like the main container. So this would be on my mouse move, handle mouse move, and then we are going to also add the values to update the state. So that would be on mouse enter, we're gonna set is hovering to true, and then on mouse leave set is hovering to false. And I think that should be it for this. All right, let's test it out. What is the error we're getting? EV. So now based on this, we're gonna update the styling, and the styling that would get affected and would need the dynamic value is WebKit, since that is the one that manages kind of this radial fade effect. So let's go to our pattern, which is here, and even we're gonna add a style. I don't usually do this for other styles. I use either class names or CSS, but for this one we don't have that much of a choice. Okay, so for the background image, we're gonna keep that as it is. We're gonna apply web kit mask. That would be radial gradient, and we have ellipse actually. 70%, 60% at mouse position here, and then also at Y. And then what else do we have? The rest of the values. I'm just gonna copy, paste. All right, and same thing for just a mask. All right, so if we comment this out now, try this. All right, you can see how this is following my mouse movement, and then if I move my mouse, it's going away. Actually, I'm gonna leave this in the middle by default, but for the hover over, let's make the ellipse smaller. What if we do 30%, 20%? Actually, we can just have it as a circle. This value we can make 35. All right, and then if we're not hovering over it, you can kind of see when I stop, it gets stuck on the last position. And we want that to like kind of disappear and then our default to appear. So for that, we're gonna tweak the opacity and we can set opacity. So what's the default value that we have? That is 0.3. So if it is hovering, we're gonna set it to 0.3 and then if not, then 0. So now if I go over here and then I move to a different section, it's gonna go away, and we're gonna replicate another pattern background. So this would not have this styling, only the default one. So I'm gonna remove this and I'll create a new class that I would call default, maybe default fade. I don't know if that's the... And I will apply that to this one, but same thing we need here for the style. So this would be other way around, is hovering. Then we set it to 0. And then if not, oh, I need to say opacity. Okay. And this is really cool, but it just, as far as I move, it happens really quickly, the transition. So let's make that a little bit smoother. And we can use the value transition and we can set it to on the opacity. So that means when opacity changes and then how long the transition we want it to be. And what kind of transition I'm going to pick is in and out. It would kind of like appear. For the next step, we are going to add a footer. Then we're going to make some tweaks to make sure our site is mobile responsive. And for the final part, we are going to deploy it so it is accessible by a URL, and then you can share it. A footer, as usual, it would be added at the bottom of our page. And for that, let's create a new component. It would be like a simple one that just shows information and functional component, constant footer, and then let's return this export default footer. We're gonna put that in a container and let's add, we don't have a privacy policy, we're just gonna close this out. Then we add this in, actually we can go to the layout so that it's shared by all the pages, and this would be in the main layout in the landing page folder. All right, and after the children, this goes here. I'm gonna close this out. Check, let's reload the page because I don't see it here. Oh, yeah, it was all the way further down. All right, so it does say item center, even though and then I'm gonna remove justify between. Let's also do text center. For the footer itself, I will do full width. And item center, also justify center. All right, and let's do for this one border at the top only. Update the border color. We can set it a same color as the text. All right, and then we should see this footer once we go to the post page. So yeah, these are all the links that we updated. We had the custom styling, and here's our footer. Going back to the home page, let's see how it looks like on the mobile and make those changes that I mentioned. So we would have to first, this is really big, so I'm gonna modify starting off with the header. So let's do this one for medium. All right, that looks better. And then for this one, I think this looks fine. We can also center it. And same thing with the projects. We have one project per line, which is good. Let's work on the blog section that needs the most work. So what do we have here? This is flex, and then let's do on medium flex direction row. And here in the header, we are going to make this smaller on default. So text would be large. And then on larger screens, it's going to be text to Excel. And we can even change the setup for even smaller screens. We're going to display one blog per row. So that would be, where's our grid? Yeah. So by default, columns 1, and then starting off with the small breakpoint. All right, let's see how featured projects look. So on medium screen, let's do 2 per row. I'm gonna go to the project section. Moving this to 2, and then starting off with the medium grid columns 3. We can even do 4 on the large, so if we see from the mobile view, there's some width on the side that's bigger than the space that we actually need. So let's examine that. Why is it? Is what's taking up the larger width than we actually need. So then again, we're gonna add, because it's 500 pixels over 500 pixels, about that. So we are going to add media queries for this one as well. So Immediate query, so max width, it will only apply to screens that are below 768 pixels. We set the width smaller than we have, so plus 6 RAM. Then from the top left and right bottom, we add smaller values. And finally, the background size, we set it to be, here we have 66 over 66, and let's cut it in two. Saving this, let's see if that, okay, so that looks better, and we don't have this extra, we shouldn't have this extra space anymore. I believe it is still a little bit there, so I will decrease those values. And this one as well. All right, that is great. And finally, for the deployment, as we use for the storage, we are also going to use Vercel. And what we need to do to get this code up on the Vercel is first, you need a GitHub account, a Git repository where you would push this code. So I already initiated Git repository and I set it up. I will just, all the changes that I made, I will just add them, and I will generate the message, commit message using AI. So that's pretty cool. And all the changes go as up. I sync the changes, so they're actually pushed on my main branches, which I'm using. Ideally, it's good to use different branches for different features. And then here inside, so you need a Vercel account. In your dashboard, you're gonna create, add new, and this time we do project. We select, it would, if you have Git connected already, you would list your repositories and then you select the one that you're working on. So I'm gonna import this one. And this is an important step here. We'll make sure framework is set to Next.js, but also we have to add environment variables here, and this would be coming from our .env file. So the variable names and the keys itself would be the database URI, and we need payload secret. This is so that we're able to connect to our database, and then you would paste the values here, corresponding to the database URI, and then the payload secret. Once you paste those over, we are ready to deploy, so I'll hit deploy. And then this usually takes less than a minute. Deployed, we can review it instantly and do a quick test one more time. So this would be the domain where it's deployed, and we go look at this, we check the projects, images are loading, that's great. Also, we have the blog, let's check the connection. So our blog is loaded also. And this would be it for tutorial. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to leave a comment and like the video. Let me know in the comments also what kind of tutorials are you looking for in the next one. This was more beginner friendly, I would say, than other tutorials that I do that include more like a larger tech stack and more complex functionalities. But anyways, I would like to expand and film different kinds of videos. So I will see you in the next one.